So let's just ask the question right up front. Have we traded real fire for a comfortable little heater in our pulpits? Today, we're jumping into Leonard Ravenhill's classic book, Why Revival Tarries, and we're going to unpack his really provocative claim that the art of soul-stirring, life-changing preaching might just be a lost art. And this question right here is the heart of Ravenhill's entire argument. Now, he's not just talking about being a good public speaker. No, he's asking something much deeper. He's asking if the kind of preaching that literally ignites movements and turns lives upside down has been quietly replaced by something, well, something a lot safer. So let's dig into what he actually means by that. All right, here's our game plan for breaking down Ravenhill's argument. First, we'll get a handle on his main concern, this idea of a lost art. Then we'll look at how he contrasts preachers from the past with those of the present. After that, we'll dive into what he calls the price of power, and we'll wrap up with his passionate call for tears, and ultimately what he thinks revival really is. Okay, so let's get right into his central concern. You see, Ravenhill isn't just being nostalgic for the good old days. He genuinely believes that when this kind of fiery, soul-hot preaching starts to fade away, something absolutely essential gets ripped out of the spiritual life of a community. He uses this quote from a reformer way back in the 16th century to get right to the heart of it. For him, this isn't a numbers game. He's convinced that just a few truly passionate, on-fire individuals can make a way bigger splash than a whole stadium full of lukewarm ones. He thinks that somewhere along the line, we've started chasing quantity over quality. So to really build his case, Ravenhill does something pretty dramatic. He sets up this huge contrast, pitting the preachers of history against what he sees walking around today. And wow, the differences he points out are pretty stark. On one side, you have these absolute giants, right? Like the prophet Isaiah, who felt this overwhelming divine weight on his shoulders, a woe, he called it. And then on the other side, well, Ravenhill critiques what he calls snack bar sermons, these light, bite-sized, entertaining talks designed for our short attention spans, not for life-altering conviction. And this whole idea of preaching being a consuming, all-in burden, it's captured perfectly in this quote from Richard Baxter. I mean, just listen to the words he's using. Consumeth, continual pain. This wasn't just a 9-to-5 job for him. It was a calling that cost him pretty much everything. And for Ravenhill, that's what real authenticity looks like. And if you need a visual for what Ravenhill's championing, this image of John Wesley is it. The story goes that when the official churches literally barred their doors to him, he didn't just pack up and go home. Nope. He went outside and used his own father's tombstone as his pulpit. It's just so raw, so defiant, and it's driven by a conviction that just couldn't be boxed in by 4 comfortable walls. Now, this all leads to a really critical part of Ravenhill's argument. He believes that this kind of fiery preaching is directly tied to a specific kind of spiritual power. But, and this is a huge but, he warns that this power isn't free. It comes with a steep and often pretty painful price tag. So what's the first item on that price tag? According to Ravenhill, it's pain. He looks at Pentecost, this foundational moment of empowerment for the early church, and he reminds us that it was an agonizing, overwhelming experience. It's the polar opposite of our modern search for comfort and pleasure. And right alongside that pain came a profound burden. We're talking a crushing sense of responsibility for the state of the world. And again, that clashes directly with what Ravenhill sees as our modern desire for an easy, carefree life. And the final price? Prison. For those early apostles, having this kind of spiritual power often led them straight to a jail cell. And this is where Ravenhill poses a really uncomfortable question for us. Are we willing to pay that price? Or have we maybe built a version of faith that makes sure we'll never have to? Ravenhill holds up the Apostle Paul as the ultimate example of all of this. He says Paul wasn't just a speaker, he was a citywide shaker, a truly disruptive force. But, and this is so critical, that massive impact didn't stop him from also doing the hard, personal grunt work of going door to door. So after laying out this really intense diagnosis, Ravenhill's tone starts to shift. He moves from being an analyst to making this passionate, almost desperate appeal for a total change of heart. See, for Ravenhill,
true preaching just cannot be separated from deep, gut-level emotion. He issues this stark call for preachers to weep, to groan, to actually feel the weight of their own message. To him, a dry eye in the pulpit means a dry heart. And without that emotional conviction, well, there's just no way you can have a true revival.
And all of that leads him to ask this. Wow, this piercing question. He's suggesting there's a direct link, that the weakness in the congregation, what he calls the pew, might actually be a symptom of a much deeper problem in the leadership, the pulpit. I mean, that's a radical claim that puts the burden of responsibility squarely back on the preacher. So everything we've talked about, the passion, the pain, the burden, the tears, it has all been building toward this final crucial point, Ravenhill's definition of revival itself. Because in the end, this is what's really at stake in his whole argument. To help define what he means by revival, Ravenhill brings in some other voices, starting with this powerful image from J.I. Brees. The idea here is one of spiritual stagnation. You know, that the church started this incredible journey, but just got stuck somewhere on the side of the road, never quite making it to its destination. The next quote he uses from D.M. Panton is even more intense. It presents revival not as a nice little upgrade, but as an emergency intervention. It's like a divine breath rushing into a body that's literally about to become a corpse. The implication is pretty clear. Without it, spiritual death is basically inevitable. And finally, this thought from the evangelist C.G. Finney just perfectly wraps up Ravenhill's entire book. The very fact that we even need to talk about revival is an admission of failure. Think about it. You only need to revive something that's already in decline. And that is a really sobering conclusion that leaves us with a tough question. If Ravenhill is right, what does that say about the state of our own hearts and our own pulpits today?